you have become the unmistakable voice of Israel on international media. You pop up on every TV station, every radio outlet, certainly in the UK, and I'm assuming in other parts of the English-speaking world as well. But I know that you were working for the president up until April, but you've stepped back into these extremely public shoes. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Gosh, it has been the most extraordinary month. I was a private citizen when this awful war erupted with the October 7th massacre, and I've since found myself giving over 120 television and radio interviews in a month as an official spokesman of the State of Israel. You know, on October 7th, when that horrific massacre happened, something extraordinary happened, which is that the whole of Israeli society suddenly closed ranks and united around the goal of victory over the Hamas monsters. We'd spent a whole year here in Israel at each other's throats, really in the ugliest domestic arguments about judicial reform and other issues. And as soon as the massacre happened, everyone dropped everything and said, we have one national task right now. It's to destroy Hamas and to make sure that it can never perpetrate those atrocities again. And people started doing everything they could. Ordinary people started delivering food to Holocaust survivors and to soldiers in hospitals and donating socks and deodorant and everything they could for troops on the front. And in a very strange twist for me, that meant accepting a call to serve as an official spokesman for the national emergency wartime government here as we fight Hamas and move on towards victory.
How difficult was it for you? Because I know that you were quite a stringent critic of the government and its judicial reform plans. You made no secret of your opposition to those plans. How difficult was it for you then to say, okay, I am now going to be speaking on behalf of what is essentially the same government? I mean, I know it's on a wartime footing, but the personnel are the same.
First of all, the government we have now is something of a national unity government since the entry of Benny Gantz's government into the coalition, when the political system also decided to close ranks around the goal of victory. But I think the important point is this. There was an Israel before the 7th of October, and there's an Israel after the 7th of October. And those are completely different places. There was an Israel before this war and an Israel after this war. And after a year in which we were arguing about very serious issues, I don't downplay them for a single moment, people were rightfully worked up around them, we realized that we together face a dangerous collective enemy that truly wants us all dead and is willing to use any level of sadistic and satanic violence against us in order to murder every man, woman, child in the country. It's a national emergency. We are on total war footing now for total war. 240 hostages inside the Gaza Strip, bodies still being identified. And everyone dropped everything on the morning of October 7th and dedicated themselves towards victory. You know, there was the protest movement that for nearly a year had been threatening that they wouldn't do reserve service and serve under this government. And 6:45 in the morning on October 7th, they dropped everything and told everyone to go and do their reserve duty, even before the magnitude of the crisis was clear. And that's really something extraordinary about Israel, that actually, in contrast to previous points in Jewish history, when Jewish wars continued while the enemies were at the gates and we continued ripping ourselves apart, this time, everyone closed ranks. This time, everyone united. This time, everyone knows to work together because we need each other, because we love each other, because we have no choice but to live and fight together. And we're going on towards victory.
Kol hakavod. So let me take you back a little to your student days, because you're in Britain, at any rate, you're I was going to say famous, perhaps notorious, for your clash with the very difficult politician, George Galloway. And he is now making his presence felt on social media. I don't know if you've had the opportunity with so many different interviews and the responsibilities you've got now, but he was the person who said he wouldn't debate with you when you were a student once he found out that you were Israeli. How does that make you feel and reflect now when you look at some of the things that he's been saying on social media?
First of all, it's funny you mentioned that debate with George Galloway a decade ago in Oxford. I hope I've finally done something to live that down as my only claim to fame.
Absolutely.
George Galloway is truly, I would say, despicable human being, but I think human being would be going too far. Just a deplorable character. And we've seen him during this war peddling full on Holocaust denial level nonsense about the atrocities of October 7th, going full 9/11 truther about the facts of the massacre. Because, of course, for people who are so heavily invested in the violent Palestinian cause, it is impossible to admit the extent of the barbarity on October 7th and admit the extent to which they have been complicit with fomenting that narrative, with giving that violent ideology a tailwind. Either they absolutely support the atrocities they're denying, or the cognitive dissonance is just making their brains explode. But we're definitely seeing that with a lot of people, not just George Galloway. The incredible shift between the people who were celebrating the October 7th massacre when it happened and then shifted towards justifying it and then are now actively denying it, I think is the sort of cognitive dissonance that psychology textbooks are going to discuss for decades to come.
What's been the most difficult thing for you in putting Israel's case over in these many media interviews? Are you getting um, initial hostility from the presenters and the interviewers, or are you being left free to make Israel's case? Do you find it a difficult case to make?
First of all, many presenters are doing their jobs when they ask very difficult questions, and I prefer the difficult interviews that I have because they give me an opportunity to present Israel's case clearly against the most vigorous criticism instead of wheeling off talking points. I welcome that. I think it's very important. But there is no doubt that being an Israeli government spokesman, you are subjected to a certain degree of hostility and needing to prove your humanity. You know, I had an interview with Kay Burley on Sky News a few weeks ago, in which she asked me a question about the suffering of Israeli and Palestinian parents, and I answered. And then she asked, I gave you an opportunity to sympathize with Palestinian parents. Would you like to take that opportunity? And sometimes it does feel a little bit insulting, as if I have to prove that I have a heart, that the images on our screens are difficult for us to watch too. But we
Mhm.
hold Hamas responsible for them because Hamas declared war with the massacre on October 7th. Hamas chose to wage that war from inside densely populated areas, and we're doing everything we can in order to get civilians out of harm's way. But I definitely notice with journalists a tendency to say, after something Israel claims, we cannot independently verify this, even though we've presented the footage, which is not difficult to geolocate and independently verify it if you try to do it, and then parroting off Hamas propaganda, Hamas figures, taking a headline and saying Israel did XYZ atrocity, comma, Gaza Health Ministry claims, when everything Israel says has the caveat, we cannot independently verify it. So that difference is definitely very frustrating to deal with. But I know that we have the facts on our side. I know that we have the law on our side. I know that we have humanity and morality on our side. So chin up and stiff up a lip.
Well, that's very British of you. Have you I mean, I'm sure you're aware that there's a great deal of concern and anxiety here. You mentioned Kay earlier from Sky, but certainly she's one of the three pillars of anxiety here, particularly Channel 4 News and, of course, the BBC. Can you perhaps go through for me how you approach these broadcasters, and do you think that there is an inbuilt bias when they come to you?
First of all, of course, there is an inbuilt bias against Israel. That is clear from anyone who watches an interview with an Israeli government spokesman. A lot of journalists are very eager to dismiss any evidence that Israel presents of its own good conduct and try to spin it against it. I had an interview a few weeks ago with Channel 4 in which I spoke about the Human Shield hotline, the phone number that Israel has opened for Palestinians who are being held human shields by Hamas, who aren't being allowed to leave the northern Gaza Strip, to call the Israeli army and tell us where they're being held. And Channel 4 was, of course, immediately dismissive and tried to take it towards the direction of how that hotline was supposed to work when phone lines are down. Of course, they had no problems contacting their own people inside the Gaza Strip. Instead of taking a pause for a moment and saying, well, you know what? Israel here is taking efforts that none of the 86 nations that fought ISIS took in order to protect civilians. So it can be a little bit disheartening sometimes that our best efforts in impossible circumstances are dismissed, and that bias is very clear. It's, I think, very difficult to escape that narrative that sees Israel as being ultimately at fault, being ultimately responsible for everything, and understanding that actually Israel has found itself here in an impossible situation, dealing with a cynical enemy that is making it as difficult as possible to play fair and to play by the rules of the game, which we're insisting on doing. That's very important for us. And I think it's important to just continue stating the facts, to try to be calm. That's not always easy, but remain calm, present the facts, and hope that that comes through to the viewers at home. And I can say from the incredible number of messages of support that I've been receiving from people around the world, I think it's cutting through.
Now, I'm wondering if there is something in the supposition that a calm British accent goes a long way to putting over the argument. I mean, apart from Mark Regev, there's a whole array of expat Brits who are fronting the conversation about Israel. We have Peter Lerner back on duty. We have Richard Hecht with a Scottish accent. We have Jason Perlman. So this is very nice that there's is there a kind of backstage camaraderie among the Brits?
Well, British Jewry is certainly punching above its weight. Definitely those who decided to take the plunge and make Aliyah. If we have one unique selling point, it's our accents. The Americans seem to love it, and we're bringing that, putting that at the service of the state of Israel in this awful war. Of course, we all know each other. We're all on friendly terms. I can't say we have a big secret WhatsApp group together, but we all know each other and very much admire each other's work.
Well, that's nice to hear. Do you find that you're getting an easier ride from the Americans or the Canadians than you are from the British journalists?
Not necessarily. It really depends on the outlet. Some American outlets are particularly hostile, and some British presenters will be more sympathetic towards the Israeli position. I don't think it's necessarily one way or the other, but British interviewers have been tough. They have been tough.
I guess. Has anybody ever asked you a question that you've simply not been able to answer?
There's always an answer.
Well, I guess, but I mean,
That question now was very close to a question that I couldn't answer.
I
But
guess.
there's always an answer. You can never be stumped. You can never be stumped. There's always something to say because there's always a point to be made. There's always a point to be made about why we are fighting this war, why we don't want to be in this war, but why we have to fight it, why we're doing our best. And it's always important to bring people back to that basic fact. This isn't a war Israel started, wanted, or expected. It's a war that we were dragged into, and it's a war that we have to win, and we have to end in a way that ends Hamas.
How do you train for such a job?
8 years on the university and schools debating circuit, 5 years as a television news anchor, and 2 years as a presidential media advisor. I would say that's my media training.
Uh-huh. And what happens after the war for you? You're going to
After
go,
the war,
yeah. You're going to
well, I'll
stay in
tell
this
you what
job?
I'll tell you what I tell every interviewer who asks me about what our plans are as a country for the day after Hamas. That unfortunately, the day after Hamas is not in the immediate offing. We wish that we could send an email to Hamas and make it go away and that this war could be over by next week. Unfortunately, it looks like this is going to be a very long and difficult slog. And we're powering ahead. We're powering ahead to victory and focusing on that task. And when this war ends, when it ends with an Israeli victory, this whole country is going to have a lot of healing to do, a lot of rebuilding to do. There was an Israel before October 7th, an Israel after October 7th, an Israel before this war, and there will be an Israel to rebuild after this war.
I guess. So the question on everybody's lips this morning is there a hostage deal? Can you talk to me
Look,
about
Israeli
that?
society is sick with worry about the fate of the hostages. Really, we're such a small country that everyone knows someone who was abducted. No one is sleeping properly in this country. No one has been sleeping properly. We all feel we've aged 5, 10 years from the stress and the worry, and that's people within the second circle, not even the immediate circle of the hostages' families. Of course, we hope that we're able to bring them all home, safe and sound, but you'll appreciate that these are sensitive negotiations in which human lives hang in the balance, and so I can't comment. Really, the less we say, the better, and I hope we will have positive news.
From your mouth to God's ears. Eylon, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for giving me time. And I hope, in a way, that your job ends sooner rather than later.
I hope it'll be over by Christmas.
Please, God.
Or Hanukkah. Thank you, Jenni.